Welcome to UNCAGED. Today we're speaking with Vyom Upadhya. Vyom, I'm excited to talk with you. Vyom wears a couple of different hats, but I think that there's some common threads here that will kind of pull things together. He's certainly a long-term performing tech executive. He is an executive director at MDVIP. So there's a healthcare technology expertise here. He's also the leading partner of CTO to Grow, which is essentially a fractional CTO service and how that works. And then he is the leader of a nonprofit group in Southern Florida. He's the president of esteemed South Florida, the Society for Information Management, and they represent 40 plus chapters nationwide with 40,000 plus members. Vyom has woven his technology expertise and really pushed these areas forward. But before we get there, Vyom, tell us a little bit about you and your career today.
Yeah, happy to. Again, my name is Vyom. Grew up in South Florida, so fairly a native. First 10 years of my professional career, I spent in the consulting space, in the billing and CRM tech world, helping cable and telco operators throughout the United States. But in the last 10 years, what my career has really evolved to is really these three focus areas that you earlier mentioned, Ben. The first one is I developed a passion for finding things that I can focus on that have a impact, right? So now that impact could be impact at scale, which is sort of what brought me to MDVIP. MDVIP's core mission is to literally make healthier lives happen. It's a large primary care physician group representing about 1,200 physicians throughout the United States who focus on preventative personalized medicine, right? So there's a lot of sort of clinical outcomes and health outcomes that we're able to deliver. And in my role as somebody who's responsible for the software, both enterprise and consumer facing at MDVIP, that sort of digital journey that accompanies the primary care side of the house, I find a lot of enjoyment in, and I've been there for about 10 years now. The second pillar is a fractional chief technology officer role that I play as an advisory function for companies. This entity started really around the pandemic. And one pattern recognition I saw, having had some exposure to the private equity world, is that there tends to be a lot of focus on the sort of the largest companies in the United States, right? So you call them like your enterprise players, and every advisory company function is sort of going after them. And then there tends to be a lot of focus in the startup space, right? And VCs are coming in and going there. But there's this whole like middle market of companies that represents about 200,000 different businesses throughout the US, ranging from 10 million to about $1 billion in revenue. And these entities struggle. They struggle with digitizing, they struggle with talent, they struggle with growth. They're often family-led, they're fairly often private equity backed. And so I found that there's sort of a sweet spot for bringing technology advisory services to these companies at the highest level of leadership. And then last but not least, and part of my sort of personal mission statement of learning, growing, and giving, part of that giving piece was specifically in South Florida. South Florida is a quickly emerging hub of technology and huge sort of startup ecosystem here as well. But one of the things that we're still focused on building here is a talent pipeline and a talent presence. And so what SIM South Florida, the Society of Information Management, our chapter here in South Florida is focused on is really elevating technology leaders in our ecosystem and then creating new technology leaders, right? So the companies that either move here or are born here have a great pipeline of future CTOs, CIOs, tech leaders that they can tap into. So
That's amazing. I mean, as you know, I live in South Florida as well, and I know that building that form of a community is so important. So I'm glad that you're involved in pushing that forward, Vyom. But I mean, it's quite incredible. You have an expansive perspective on technology, and you're working on a variety of areas. Tell me a little bit about what kind of topics are really bubbling to the surface right now with various customers and some of these teams that you're part of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we were to take sort of my experience with working with various mid-market companies, I work across a variety of sectors, right? So it's not just healthcare, but real estate, manufacturing, logistics, construction. There's probably three macro patterns that most businesses are focused on right now. There continues to be a talent issue, right? And so we still have a low unemployment rate. If you kind of look in the technology space, it's still like in the 1 to 2% range, depending on which research you look at. So companies are struggling with finding and retaining talent. And of course, the higher up sort of you go the ladder, right? And the broader sort of the scope of that talent is thinking like a chief technology officer, the tougher that it becomes, right? So that's talent acquisition, retention, growth continues to be on minds of a lot of businesses. The second pattern I see is really with the inflationary environment and with the just supply chain sort of realities that are happening, everything just costs a lot more. So,
Mm,
and now that credit isn't cheap, companies are struggling to survive, thrive, and grow in an environment where it's tougher to get credit to drive growth. It's
yeah.
tougher to purchase assets, and it's tougher to buy services. I mean, just to throw an example out there, if you look at like SaaS software between 2022 and 2023, the average like SaaS subscription cost has quadrupled right now. Now our inflation hasn't quadrupled, but technology is sort of disproportionately more expensive than it used to be a few
Mm.
years ago. And then last but not least is really just the keeping up with the pace of technology, right? So with recent advances in, whether it's large language models and everybody's sort of talking about AI and GPT and, leveraging sort of these machine learning models that are out there that can seemingly like magically do amazing things for all of us. How do companies adapt to that and then leverage actually those in a very practical, effective way so that they can continue to thrive and stay ahead of the curve. So those are probably the three most common denominators that I see across my client base.
Are you seeing that shape how they're operating? I mean, I think traditionally, if there was an economic cycle where you had, let's say, high inflation and you were, let's say, cutting core jobs, it would just mean a lot more projects would be outsourced, near sourced. Is that what's happening, or are they still trying to hire these people internally?
Yeah. So, at the first principles, right? I think that there's plenty of evidence. There's a National Center for the Middle Market that's run out of Ohio, and they did a whole research study on companies in the mid market and how they experience sort of the digital transformation journey, right? So companies that have traditionally been offline, they're not selling software, they're not selling technology services. They might be like your large construction firms or real estate firms or really old like family run manufacturing businesses, right? That have had to shift their supply chains. And the common pattern that we find is that companies that really aggressively invest in digital transformation and digitizing their businesses, right? So that could be internal processes that are automated, analytics that are kind of thrown at the business to make better decisions, and then also consumer experience, right? That becomes more digital. These companies outpace companies that don't do that by like a factor of two, right? So digital companies grow at like on an average like 10, 11%, and sort of non-digitally invested companies grow on average at like 5 to 6%, right?
Right.
And so the investment in technology continues to be a strong imperative. And when I say investment, I'm not talking about playing defense and sort of just keeping up to speed. I'm talking about playing offense and actually aggressively thinking about how technology can enable the strategies that company has.
Yeah.
Now, in a tougher credit environment where you can't find talent, and all of your typical service supply chains are more tougher to kind of execute on, companies are starting to go back to a lot of the creative solutions, right? And outsourcing is like one of them, but that's sort of what generated even the opportunity that I pursue, right? So it's like, the typical pitch is, well, why hire a chief technology officer when you can rent a great chief technology officer to help you support your business? I remember in one case, and this was a very short-term role, I helped the company actually recruit a technology team over time, but in the meantime, sort of filled the gap that they had of having that expertise and skill set inside. So I think all that's happening is in the current market is companies are finding themselves to be exceedingly creative in how they approach investment in technology, but they're also realizing that they cannot stop or cut or end projects, because that is very imperative to what their growth strategy is.
So, Vyom, I mean, it's amazing to listen to you. You're clearly extremely knowledgeable about the space. And so you are what I would say someone who is passionate about technology and passionate on how it can shape businesses and help them grow in an accelerated fashion. But tell me a little bit about what drives that passion. Where did it come from and why is it what gets you up in the morning?
Yeah, there's like a Japanese phrase for that too, right? Finding joy in life.
Yeah.
I think that as I kind of think about my core mission, it's really this idea of like learning, growing, and giving back. And it's actually sourced from there's an American philosopher I really love, Joseph Campbell, and he's no longer there, but he wrote a couple of books around sort of this idea of the hero's journey, right? Which is
Hmm.
not his original idea, but it's sourced from various other philosophers and historians that surveyed mythologies and societies around the world. And the basic concept of a hero's journey, and if you look at like Star Wars, you'll see it. If you look at like old Greek myths, you'll see it. The basic concept is that a reluctant leader goes on an adventure to solve some big, massive, hairy problem, and then ultimately solves it, and then comes back with sort of something that enriches their own experience in life and journey, but also something that they can actually give to somebody else, right? Give back to society. And you look at pretty much any legend, myth, story, culture around the world, and this is sort of a very base prototype of what the human experience is about. And so I guess what drives me is like, I want my life to be a series of these heroes' journeys, right? Where I wake up in the morning, I realize an opportunity where I can, make an impact. There are difficulties along the way, so I don't like doing easy things. I like to always be in a sort of discomfort zone. But ultimately, it comes back to that whatever I experience and gain from that experience, I'm able to sort of use that to contribute back, right? And empower people, inspire them, or make an outsized impact, like in some of the examples that we talked about. And I guess that's what drives me. Now, where does it come from? Probably my parents. Like my dad is my hero. My mom's my hero. So that's probably where it's sort of the classic nurture thing. But yeah, I think that's what wakes me up in the morning.
I love that. And I love the combination of really building your expertise, deepening it, and then using that to give back in a variety of ways. But I mean, Vyom, as you've mentioned throughout the conversation today, the things are shifting quickly right now in the business landscape. And it's really hard to kind of read the tea leaves right now. As a business owner myself, I constantly try to predict and I constantly get it about 40% right.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah, but it's quite an interesting time. So I'd be curious to see what you see on the horizon over the next, let's say, 18 months.
Yeah, I think in terms of sort of the relationship of technology and business, we're often caught up in these hype cycles, and some of that is happening right now with machine learning and AI. But that being said, I think that more and more organizations are going to find ways in which automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, large language models, like this entire space can impact everything that they're doing, right? Everything from product development to customer experience to strategy and planning. Now, I think that what's important is to not stop, right? And so I think what we'll find in the next 18 months is organizations that are constantly experimenting, learning fast, if not failing fast, right? And
Right.
and then building upon that, I think they will have better resilience, and they will sort of build moats around their business, right? To prevent their businesses from dying out. And organizations that sort of remain stale, underinvest, will suffer, right? Unfortunately, as a result, because I think the pace of change will accelerate, right, over the next 18 to 24 months. So what I always advise like my clients to is like find those specific sort of pain points, use cases where you can take emerging technologies like AI or GPT and then apply them, right? Like a simple use case that comes to mind is like, okay, well, if you have developers building a product or engineering, use tools like Copilot or AI assisted
Yeah.
coding techniques. I mean, heck, I mean, they have like a 85 NPS with developers. I mean, I think it's like 40 or 50% of developers accept code that's being generated by an AI, right? So start experimenting with that, use that, and learn from it, and then ultimately figure out what that means for your business. So.
Vyom, I mean, we've covered a lot today. We've been speaking to Vyom Upadhya. He is the executive director at MDVIP. He's also the managing partner of CTO to Grow, and he is the president of Society for Information Management. And we've been talking about that mix of bringing together expertise together with giving back and how that can work, but it's also a real key time for companies to think about what they're going to prioritize. And so we've been speaking to Vyom about that as well. Vyom, thank you so much for being on UNCAGED today. If someone wanted to learn more about what you're working on, where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, so ctotogrow.co is the website. So ctotogrow.co. Always happy to connect on LinkedIn and exchange ideas and thoughts and feedback. So you can look me up on LinkedIn. And then SIM South Florida, simsfl.org is the nonprofit that I run here in South Florida. So if you happen to be in South Florida and are passionate about building the community down here, strongly encourage you to visit that website. And MDVIP is available at mdvip.com. So here you go, 3 URLs you can learn about. Depending on which direction you want to go, you can check it out. So
excellent. Well, Vyom, again, thank you so much for being on the show today, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
Cheers.